Yo, happy new year once again. Welcome back to another live stream right here on Free Will Photos. Today we're going to be looking at the develop module, a deep dive. We're going to go into, a lot of information about the develop module. Now, for just meeting, my name's Chris. I'm the content creator here at Free Will Photos, and I just want to help new photographers learn how to use ON1 Photo Raw as well as other photo editing applications so you can get your creative vision out and into the world. If that's something you're interested in, smash the like button and the subscribe button and then the notification icon so that way you get notified whenever I send new content over to YouTube. Now, let's go ahead and jump into the slides since we got all that out of the way. And we'll go with this. All right. So as you can see, develop module, and while we're on this particular topic, I will mention we're going to be talking about. I'm going to show you JPEGs. I'm going to show you RAWs, image formats at least, and how to develop. We're not going to jump into any of the more fancy tabs. We're just going to stay right inside of develop. We're going to talk about some of the limitations that comes along with this because there are limitations. But I think if you're just starting out, with photo editing, this is where you can really make 80% of your edit and then maybe make it a little bit better moving into the other tabs. So let's jump back into the computer and let's get underway. Now, the first segment of today's lesson, there's some slides, and I'm going to go through these fairly quickly because I want to be able to break down what each of these areas are, but I want you to have some familiarization if you've never seen these before, or if you have and you're just not quite sure what the heck they mean. So, this is a snapshot of the 4 separate modules or tabs inside of the develop module. At the top left of the screen, you can see in the grayed out area, that's the develop module. All right. And you have 5 modules if you're using ON1 Photo Raw 2022, and you have 4 modules if you're using anything before that. The only difference is that you won't have the sky option, but that's not what we're talking about today. So let's move on. Now, if you go just below the develop module, you have the preset save icon. We'll talk about this a little bit because saving some presets in the develop module may be beneficial, but I highly recommend you do not save any presets from the develop module outside of a few things which we'll talk about. Now we can move down the line here and talk about the 4 modules. All right. The first one is tone and color. This is where you're going to spend a lot of your time in the develop module, making your photo look the way you want it to look with the contrast and everything of that sort. Then we have the noise and sharpening. Now, the noise and sharpening is exactly that. It's going to remove noise, and I have some recommendations here in a little bit. And then you can add sharpening, which I also have recommendations on. The third tab is going to be your lens corrections. Now, not all of the lens will be found inside of ON1 Photo Raw, so I'll show you how you can make manual adjustments to your lens. Now, that's not going to be in depth. If that's something you want to see a little bit more in depth, then drop a comment down below or let me know in the chat here on the live, and I will be more than happy to go a little bit deeper. But today I'm just going to show you the roundabout ways because most of beginner photographers will not spend too much time here. And then the last tab is the transform tab. This is another tab we're not going to dive super deep into today, but they are tabs that we will look at. Now, I do want to make note of 2 other things. On the left side of the lens and the transform tab, note that there's a blue dot. That blue dot is the on and off switch. All right. You can turn the effect that you put on to the photo. You can turn it off and on by clicking on that blue dot. No different than anything else that has a blue dot inside of ON1 just wanted to point that out. Those are the only two tabs that actually allow you to do a off and on comparison. And then on the far right hand side, that's highlighted in green, every one of these tabs has a reset button. So if you ever get too far into your edit and you just need to reset that particular tab, you can smash that button on the far right hand side. Now, the one at the very top that is across from the preset icon, that's going to reset everything. So just keep in mind that if you hit the very top reset button, you're going to reset your entire image. That may not be what you want. So pay attention to which one you're clicking. The reason why they're so close right now is because the tabs are collapsed. But if the tabs were to be expanded, then that would be just as good. So let's go to the next slide. Now, I did plan to dive a little bit deeper into these on the slides. I have like almost a page of notes on just this page alone, but I don't think that'll be very interesting. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to point out that the tone and color tab on the left hand side, that is what the full module looks like. Okay, everything that's highlighted in green over there, that's what the full module looks like. The next two images to the right are the tone and color top portion, and then the structure, color, and saturation. These are the only ones that you really need to worry about is camera profile, which we're going to go over. And then there's some AI switches. Note that that's in a different color because when you click those, it's going to automatically adjust. It's going to use some sort of algorithm to adjust the highlights, midtones, shadows, whites, and blacks. Okay. And contrast even. It will not adjust the exposure, and you'll see why. And then you can use the auto slider left and right as long as, you know, if the auto settings are too much for your liking, you can just back that off all the way down to 0, which brings you right back to manual. Now, anytime that you use an auto slider and then you go and make an adjustment to one of the 7 sliders that are down below, it will revert to manual because now you're making manual settings. That's nothing wrong with that. You'll see this in action here in a second. Then moving over to the right, the structure and haze. We're not going to spend too much time with that because the structure is really just adding in a level of contrast, micro clarity to the image to make it look a little bit more sharp and pronounced. And then haze, if you shot into the sun and there's like a white haze around your image, you can move that left and right to see if it improves your image. Really helpful for landscape photos, even portrait photos, by the way. And we'll also see how this works on a few product images. And then the last thing or I guess not the last thing, then there's the color and the saturation. These two, they're in the same section, but they're not quite the same. The color, or at least the top portion, where it says as shot, that has to do with your white balance. Now, your camera, it captures a white balance. I do have to put a disclaimer that if you are working on a JPEG image, then this portion of the color, you want to use sparingly because you're probably not going to be able to change the white balance the way that you would be able, that you're thinking of with a RAW photo, which is why it's always beneficial to shoot in RAW and JPEG if you have the storage capacity for it. Otherwise, if you know that you're going to be doing heavy editing, I recommend you shoot RAW. Now, if you're a beginner and you have no idea what I'm talking about, shoot in JPEG all day, every day. Just get used to using your camera and come into ON1, make your photo edits. We'll make that, we'll make it make sense later. All right. But then you have your temperature and your tint sliders, and you'll see how those work. And then we have saturation and vibrance. Now, the reason why I said there's two separate sections is you could leave your white balance as is and adjust your saturation and vibrance very specific to the image that you're working on, and you don't need to worry about your white balance. But sometimes you actually have to correct the white balance. So that's why I'm saying they're two separate things. Now, saturation is going to add tons of saturated color to your image. It's going to make your colors more full of whatever that color is, if that's even the right way of saying that. And then the vibrance is just going to take out, or it's going to boost those middle colors that they didn't quite have a lot of saturation, and it's going to help get those a little bit more saturated. Vibrance is a lot more subtle because it does look for muted colors, and it only boosts the saturation to the muted colors, making that color look a little bit more vibrant, or bringing a little bit more life to it. Whereas saturation just takes everything that has a color value and pulls it up. That's what it does. All right. Now we get to noise and sharpening. Notice I have red boxes. These are the classic options for noise reduction and the sharpening tools. I don't recommend you use these. Just skip over this whole section. If you have a photo with a lot of noise in it, you are better off using the effects module, which we're not going to go over today, or a third-party plugin. Now, that only stands if you are using ON1 Photo Raw 2021 or previous. Now, if you have No Noise AI, either as a plugin or as the or you have ON1 Photo Raw 2022, then you'll have No Noise AI actually inside of ON1 Photo Raw. I feel like there's no better option internal to ON1 than No Noise AI. It is by far one of the best options. It does come with some limitations of not being able to mask it in with a local mask. You'll have to mask it in using the layers. I have a video on that, so you can check the channel, and at the end of the stream I'll drop it into the description. But moral of the story, No Noise AI, that's the one you want to use. Don't use the classic. That is lame. It does not work. It is not good. And if anyone has had any success with the classic noise reduction inside of the develop module, please share that with me, because I have used that and it has not helped. So don't recommend it at all. However, No Noise works fantastic. I'm in between Topaz Denoise and the No Noise, but moral of the story, No Noise, it works, and if you have it, you should use it. Now, I'm not going to go over all the sliders here because I don't think that would be worthwhile. Just know that No Noise is the one that you want to use, and when we get into the actual edits, you'll see how that works out. And then we have lens correction. Now, I need to start with the asterisk. Up at the top, you can see that the photo here was taken with a RF 50 millimeter f1.8 lens. This is for my Canon EOS system. I apologize for that. This is for my Canon EOS system, and the style is default. You can change the style and hopefully find the lens that you're looking for. Or I'm sorry, the style is where you save the preset that you would have to make further down. So that's why I want to show that asterisk. You can save presets if the lens that you're using is not inside of ON1 Photo Raw's library. Now, if you go down where lens profile is, you can see that it identified the make of the lens as Canon, but there was no match. So I can drop down this list and try and find a lens that's similar, and it'll give me some adjustments down here. And then I can click on manual, and I've just expanded the manual portion, and we can mess around with this. Now, again, I'm not going to go super deep into the lens correction, but if that's something you're interested in, just let me know. I'll make a video dedicated to making lens corrections. And I think it's a little bit more technical than most people will ever need, especially if you're a beginner just learning how to use ON1 Photo Raw. You may be okay with just using the presets. And if you don't get a lens correction in there, you'll be all right. Don't worry about it. All right. Don't worry about it. You do not have to use every single tool that is available to you inside of ON1. All right. And then the last slide before we go into our demo is the transform module or tab. You can see there's 3 tools up at the top: keystone, level, and move. We'll take a look at those today. They're not, you'll know when you need to use these, but if you never have to use these, then you'll be all right. I've been using ON1 for about 3 years now, or maybe 4 years. And I have not had to use these a whole lot now, or this tab a whole lot, which is why we're not going to go into it, because you're going to get the most, I guess, the most value out of learning how to edit your photos quick and easy from the tone and color segment, and then maybe moving a little bit into that noise segment, but don't worry about it. So I'm not going to go crazy deep into this. So let's go ahead and jump over to ON1. All right, here we are with the ON1, and see if I can get my camera to come back up. There it is. I am here. I am here. And I'll put my camera over on the left. There we go. All right. So here we are inside of ON1, and what I did, I curated a few photos so that way it'll be a little bit easier for us to take a look at this. So I have some raw images. These are the .cr3 files, and then I have some JPEG images from a Mother's Day. I think this was in 2013. So 1 year after I got my first DSLR. So those would be fun because I started in JPEG. Which is why I'm saying don't be intimidated that you have to shoot in RAW. If you've never used a camera before, like I had never used a camera, or at least I was a year in, yeah, I shot JPEG. I shot all JPEG. In fact, we're just going to start with a JPEG. So we'll select this image of my 2 daughters, which they're the reason that I picked up a camera in the first place, because I wanted to document their life. Which I have been doing, and I love to do it, and they love to see the pictures. Even though my oldest daughter loves to make silly faces in the photos, because that's just what kids do. All right. Shout out to kids. Let me know if you guys are running into those same challenges when you photograph your kids. Now, on a JPEG image, I'm try and make this a little bit larger. On a JPEG image, you'll notice the tone and color section, the camera profile is grayed out. And I only have 2 options. I have manual and AI auto. I don't have the AI match like I showed you earlier. The reason for that is the JPEG image is already displayed. With a RAW photo, the AI match is referencing the smaller version of a JPEG that makes that photo look like the photo on the back of your camera. The reason why that matters is because RAW files is just a bunch of data. It doesn't have any real shape or form until you bake it in to a JPEG or a TIFF. Well, that's essentially what happened, because now I have a JPEG. That means the photo is actually formed. A raw image is not a photo, which is why it requires you to do some developing. But JPEGs are already photos, and it's a shareable compressed file with all the information you need to send it and print and all that good stuff. Now, with that being said, the exposure we're going to leave alone. I'm sorry, let's just jump back up here. We're going to hit AI Auto. Let's see what ON1 thinks we should do to this image. And then to review the image, you can do a few different things. To see what happened, you can hit the / key, which is right above the return key on your keyboard, and it'll turn the edits off and on. And as you can see, it's adding in a little bit of saturation and even some contrast in there. Now, if you want to be able to see it side by side, if you come down to the bottom of ON1, hey, what's up, Antony? Yeah, sorry, I wasn't paying attention to the comments. I was just going. Yeah, JPEGs, nothing wrong. Family photos, I have no issues. I use JPEGs all the time. I haven't recently, but I do use JPEGs a lot. So if you want to compare your images left and right, then you can click the letter A down at the bottom. It's going to give you this little preview preview slider. And obviously the photo on the right, and I'll zoom in here so you can see it a little bit better. The segment on the right has the edit, and then the segment on the left has the original image. And let me just drag this over, and then we'll pull this halfway. So you can see on the left side of my daughter's face, there's no edit. It's just this less saturated area. And then on the right side here, you can see more saturation. And as I pull this lever to the left, I'm revealing more of that edit. So this is a really good way for you to review your edits and see what's going on, and make adjustments accordingly. Now, to turn that off, you just hit the letter A one more time, and it turns it off, and it just puts the full preview back onto your screen. And then you can just use that / key, as I mentioned before, above the return to turn your edits on and off. Now, as I mentioned, if I use the AI Auto or the AI Match, I get this auto slider and it lights up. If I start to pull this to the left, you can see it is, if you look down here at these, the sliders down here, as I pull this to the left, you can see it is removing some of those adjustments. Now, the cool thing about this is it removes all of these incrementally, so it's uniform in its approach to removing the information from the image. And then as I pull this up, it starts to move them uniformly again. So whatever the algorithm is that ON1 used to expose the image or develop the image, however you want to look at it, then as you push this up or down, it's going to keep those same ratios throughout the entire range of this auto slider. Now, if for some reason you're like, you know what, I'm going to pull down to here, and this is how I recommend you use it. You hit AI Auto and you pull this down until you get to a place where you're like, yeah, that looks pretty good. And then this is where you kind of have to start making your own creative adjustments. Like if I look at her bow up here, I think those highlights may be just a little too bright. So I'm going to come to the highlights and I am going to pull that down. And if you pay attention to the bow, it brings down those highlights, but it's also bringing down the highlights over the entire image. And now is probably a good time to tell you that any adjustment you make to this particular tab inside of Develop, these are what's known as global settings. All right. These are global settings. I don't recommend, if you're editing the image, just think of this as like if you're using Apple Photos, you don't have the ability to make localized edits where I just remove the highlights on the bow and leave everything else unaffected. That's where the local tab comes in, but we're not going into that today. Global edits means it's going to make the adjustment over the entire image. I'm gonna grab a sip of tea. And there's nothing wrong with that, okay? When you're starting out, there's nothing wrong with making global edits because the goal is just to get you used to understanding what happens to your image when you edit it, all right? Now, I'm gonna pull, or notice that the auto feature underneath tone, when I pulled this down, it's now grayed out. And it's grayed out because I made a manual adjustment. And the reason why that happens is I have now upset the algorithm's ratio because I've pulled this slider out of where it would have been. So it can't, it's not that intelligent apparently. All right. Artificial intelligence, not that intelligent, but that's okay. I think it's okay. This means you still have free control over your image, which is always good. So exposure, this is where you can boost, make your photo brighter or make it darker. Be careful with this slider. I recommend this being either the very first or the very last slider in your image. By double clicking on the name or on the actual dot, if you double click, it's going to reset it to 0. So if you ever get to a place and you're like, oh man, this is not working for me, just double click it and then it'll reset that to 0. Contrast is going to separate your darkest points from your brightest points. Watch the histogram as I move this slider around. If I pull this over, you see how this is now making the darkest areas darker, or moving the dark areas over to the left, which is the darkest area over here. We'll talk about the histogram in a second. You can see it's making my image a little bit darker and making the brighter areas just a little bit brighter. It's a little hard to see on this particular image because the brightest areas are just staying there. And it's really just pulling the darks away from the brightest area, giving that perceived contrast that giving the perceived look of the contrast of the darkest areas becoming darker than the brighter areas, which is true. All right. And then if you pull it in the opposite direction, it brings that darkest point closer to the brightest point. All right. And in return, it makes your image look a little fuzzy. All right. You want some contrast in your images, but that's also a stylistic thing. We're just going to double click that, set it back to 0 because this was shot in direct sunlight. And, I don't want to get too deep into the techniques, but at the time I had no idea what that was, right? I just wanted to take pictures of my kids. I did it. It's in focus. I was like, yay, victory. I did it. But you can tell that this is in direct sunlight coming straight down because the shadows are cast underneath her chin and they're long. So that means that it was directly over her and really coming from this direction. So that's not as important in this demonstration, but you can naturally put contrast into your image. And with a JPEG, there's going to be baked in contrast based off of the manufacturer of your camera. Depending on how you set that, and maybe that'll be worthwhile for me to show you, at least on my Canon EOS Rs, you can add contrast in the camera. So when you take a photo, it bakes that contrast into it. There are some circumstances where you may want to do that. If you find a look that you really, really enjoy, you may want to bake in some contrast and some detail. There's a lot of options that we have available to us. Like right now, photography, it's a great time to be a photographer and a creator in that aspect. But getting back to the photo editing, you have the contrast slider. Then you have the highlight slider. The highlight slider is anything that is your brightest point just before white. Okay, but it's above your middle grays and it's below your whitest point in the image. The reason why you have to have a black and a white point in an image, which they put down here at the bottom, your white and your black. Those are represented. White is on the far right of the scale of the histogram, and black is on the far left of the histogram. The reason you need that is a color space has to know the range of the value for the colors, right? If you do not give a good value for the colors, then it's like, I don't know what my boundaries are, and you can get anything. But more importantly, you have to know how bright a thing can be and how dark a thing can be. And that's where the histogram comes in. If you are not familiar with this, don't worry about it so much. Just try your best to keep this from happening. Whenever you move a slider, you see these blue icons. I turn on the clipping mask, and this just shows me this is pure black. When you're starting out, do your best not to make pure black in your images. And if you, let me reset that. And if you pull this to the right, you see how now everything is red. This is pure white. You definitely, if you plan to print, you definitely do not want pure white in your images. This is going to make your images look awful when they print, especially if it's big chunks like this. Because what this is telling the printer is there's not enough information for it to even decipher a color. Remember that color space and that value. If you are blowing out your highlights and you have big chunks of red like this, that image won't print well unless you do an adjustment to the white point inside of your curves. All right. That's a more advanced technique. So if you identify, like you put your photo into ON1 Photo Raw and you click the little triangle up here in your histogram on the left side or the right side of the histogram, there's two triangles. If you click that, it turns on your clipping mask. Another way that you can see your clipping mask is if you hold the letter J on your keyboard. If you hold that down, it's going to activate the clipping mask as well. If you ever see all white, before you make any adjustments, so if I were to reset this and I seen all white, like we'll just pretend that this is what, or I'm sorry, if I see all this red when I turn on the clipping mask as soon as I import my JPEG, that means I've lost information. And if you do this on a JPEG, that information is gone. There's very little you can do to recover it. All right. I tried to find some images, but I couldn't find any in the amount of time that I took to prepare for this class. I didn't find any images that I would be able to use and show you here on the live stream. But just note that if this is what your image looks like before any edit and it's a JPEG, you lost this information. JPEGs do not store that much dynamic range or information in the highlights and shadows. That's why a raw image is important, because you'll have the ability to recover shadows and highlights. Now, let's go ahead and reset that, and I'll turn off my clipping mask. So we've talked about exposure, contrast, highlights, midtones. Now, midtones are fun because depending on the image, the midtone slider is really going to make your image look different. If you just look at the histogram, you see how the middle bell here is, it's like this really big curve, and that's why I selected this image. You can pull this and just see how the midtones respond. Now we're starting to move the midtones more into the highlight range. And then if we were to back this down, you see how I'm moving that midtone bell again, because I've moved them further into the highlights. And you can do some really cool stuff depending on how the base image came out, right? Like this could be a look. It's a little bit faded. The colors are a little odd. The tone is even odd. But, I mean, if I wanted to, I could just darken it a little bit with the black slider, and I can open up the shadows, and that could be the edit. So I go from this, which is dark and contrasty, to this, which is a little bit brighter and more punchy. And I haven't even moved my exposure or contrast slider. Now, I know that I just made an edit and didn't really explain what I was doing there, because sometimes I get a little carried away, and that's just what I do. But moral of the story, the midtone slider, you get to move the middle colors in your image. And I'm sorry, not the colors, the middle tones, the middle grays, the things that aren't quite black or aren't quite white. And you get to choose which direction you want those to be. So if you want a darker image, then move your midtones down. Now you have some really, really strong latitude with the midtone slider. You see, if I pull this all the way down, it's not going to make my image all the way dark. And if I pull it all the way up, it's not going to make my image completely crazy blown out. In fact, if I hold the J key down, you see how little information I'm losing in my daughter's shoulder. Here, let me turn on the clipping mask. In my daughter's shoulder here on the right, I'm losing some information, and then the dots on my daughter's dress over here, losing some information. But if I were to reset this and I were to push the highlight slider that far, I'm starting to lose information up here, because this is starting at a different brightness value, or luminance value is what the technical term is. But that really just means it's starting at a different point on the histogram to start moving that information closer to the brightest segment of the image. Hopefully that made some sense. If not, just drop a question in the comment section or in the chat, and I will be more than happy to answer that. But just know that if I wanted to, let me just reset everything. If I wanted to boost the midtones, I have way more value, room to do it. It's brightening the image. I don't have to touch exposure. And if I want to darken the image, I can do that. I have a lot of room to move with. Now, one of my favorite sliders is the shadow slider. The shadow slider is awesome because it allows you to open up those areas that are darker without adding in, without removing the darkest area of your image. If you look at the histogram here, let me reset this. As I slide this to the right, look at where this point stays, right? It's almost as if that point is just anchored there and everything just starts moving to the right. Now, with the shadow slider, you have to be careful because you could open your shadows too much, in my opinion, and get a very odd looking image where it looks a little dull. This is the reason why I don't use the shadow slider aggressively like this, unless the image really calls for it. Your image is going to be different. But just keep in mind that you have you have a very, very powerful slider here. And this works pretty much with with JPEGs and RAWs in the exact same way, mostly because there is more information in the darker sections of an image, especially in the shadows. That's where a lot of the detailed information is going to be. JPEGs restore, or they store that information a lot better than they do the brighter information, because the darker areas, it's easier on the camera sensor to capture that area. This is the reason why the shadow slider works better than the highlight slider on a JPEG. All right. And if you pull the shadows all the way down, then you can see I start to lose that detail. And that's because I'm starting to move that black point further to the left, which, you can try and recover some of that information by pulling up on the blacks, but now you just get like this really weird fade look. Doesn't look good. All right. So we'll reset that. And then we get into our white and our black points. The white and the black points are pretty straightforward. I wouldn't push these too far to the left, because when you do that, and I'll turn off the clipping mask so you can see what's happening here. So reset this. When I pull this to the left, you can just see that it's not a very flattering effect, especially in a portrait. You want to be a little on the conservative side when it comes to this, but I'll leave that up to you. And then you can pull this over to the right as well, and it starts to give you more of that faded look. If you want a faded look in your image, you just pull up on the blacks. I prefer to do this in the curve effect, but if you don't, if you're not going to go into effects and you just want to put this on, make your photos look a little faded, then just pull up on the blacks and you're good to go. And probably even throw in a little bit more white, and just keep the ratio of the black point higher than the white point, and you're probably going to have a faded look. Your results may vary based off of the image. For this particular image, it doesn't work as well when I pull up on the white points, so I would have to pull that back down a little bit, and that gives me more of that faded look. So there's more contrast here, less contrast, got the faded look. I can even probably pull down on the contrast and help exaggerate that look a little bit more, if that's what I was going for. All right, let's reset that one more time. We'll hit AI Auto this time. And if you look, we're jumping over structure and haze for a second. When I hit AI Auto, I'm going to reset this, but make note that it went -3 saturation and it added in 9, or it went +9 for vibrance. All right. And the numbers aren't as important as much as when you hit AI Auto, it is going to leave your white balance alone, but adjust your saturation and vibrance, because as you can see, I bring it back to 0. I hit reset, brings everything back to 0. When I hit AI Auto, it does that jump again. And this is what ON1 thinks is the appropriate saturation. All right. Now, I have no issues with the saturation. ON1 tends to remove saturation from your photo, which means it's making the colors less intense. If you pull saturation all the way to the left, you get a monochrome image or a black and white image. And if you pull saturation all the way to the right, you get some weird wonky image that looks like the color balance in science just has not been, it's not good. This actually reminds me of those not point and shoots, the disposable cameras. When they were exposed to the sun for too long before they were developed, they would start to print like with really, really orange tones in there. That was back in the day. And you just thought that that was the way that the image came out. But that's not how the image was supposed to look. And this is why I'm saying we live in a great opportunity, a great time to mess around with photography overall. All right. And then, of course, you can pull up on the Vibrance. Again, this is attacking the muted tones inside of the image. I have my saturation pulled down to 0. That means it's not adding any more saturation to the entire image. And when I pull Vibrance up, you can see I can easily get to that orange skin tone area, but I have to go pretty much at 100%. Let me see. I guess right here is where you can get into that disposable camera look that I was discussing. And that's at 62. All right. So if I reset this and I start to pull this up, and right about here, I'm getting at the disposable look filter type deal. I don't know, whatever. Disposable camera look, we'll just call it that. And I'm at 52 on saturation. So just keep that in mind. Saturation is a much more aggressive slider than Vibrance. If you want to add more color into your photo, I recommend you use saturation sparingly, right? Because this is also global, meaning it's going to impact your entire image. And then just pull up on the Vibrance and ride the Vibrance slider as much as you can. So if I wanted to make this a really colorful image like so, I'd pull the Vibrance up just about to there. And I think that looks good for the overall image. The goal, or at least my goal in most edits, is not to over bake the photo or over process the photo. I want the photo to be fairly close to what reality would be. And that are like very close to what reality would be. Now, moving back to the structure and haze sliders. These sliders, I try not to use as much on portraits or pictures where the people are the subject. All right. The reason for that, if I were to crank up on structure, it does not look good on skin. And when you are editing globally, if the people are your subject and you want them to look good, or at least presentable, then you probably don't want to mess around with structure too much. You can get away with a little bit of it, but I tend to just leave structure alone unless I'm working on a raw image, which needs some sort of sharpening. And the only way that I can get it, if I'm not going to go into the effects or using a third-party plugin like Topaz Sharpen AI, then what I'll end up doing is pushing the structure a little bit so that way I can get some perceived sharpness in my image on a global scale. All right, because the goal here is to be able to edit your image fast and easy. And then we have the haze slider. Let me reset that. Reset you. There we go. And then we have the haze slider. Now, as I pull this to the left, you can see it starts to do like some weird color tones. Now, I'll be honest, I don't know the full algorithmic shift that's happening here, which is why you just play around with this slider. If you need to remove some haze, then you pull it down. And if you need to add some haze, then you push that bad boy up. And, you know, this is actually not a bad look for the image. If I wanted to go more of like the dreamy effect or the light and airy effect or anything of that sort, then yeah, I'll throw in some haze and just check, make sure I'm not clipping, which I am. So then I would have to adjust my highlights and my white point in order to make sure that this would be printable, right? We want things that are printable. Now, if it's going to stay in the cyberspace, you don't have to worry about it as much because no one's really going to pay attention to that except for other photographers. We tend to be like these scrutinizing people. But if you are editing photos for, you know, your Aunt Sally or for your kids, your wife, your husband, whomever, then what you can get away with is a lot more than what you would send to a photographer or someone who is a photographer, and then they'll be like, oh, whoa, you blew out the highlights. Like not once has my wife or my mom or my sister, any of my family that I've sent photos to, where the highlights were clearly blown out, did they say, Chris, you blew out the highlights. They're always like, oh, look, this is a cute picture. And that's usually true because if you take photos of good subjects, then you typically get good photos. Uh, you can make them look bad because if I sent them something like this, they would be like, whoa, that looks a little weird. Um, you sure that's the final version of the image? And then it's like, yeah, don't you like that? And they'll probably say no. But if you send them something that looks like this, they'll look at it and be like, oh man, that's beautiful. All right. So don't over analyze your images when you're making edits, uh, because, you know, as much as I love to spend a lot of time editing my photos and fine tuning them, uh, it can become a little unhealthy. Uh, you know, I'm not some doctor and this isn't some medical advice or anything crazy like that, but I just want to make sure that you have a good perspective on editing the photo. Make the photo look the way that you want it to look. Share it with the people that you want to share it with. Now, if you're doing work for, you know, photo competitions, then yeah, you probably want to spend way more time editing, tweaking, making sure that it looks right, because these guys are going to be looking at your photo like with a fine tooth comb, a magnifying glass. They're going to be like really digging deep into your photo. So, but if that's the case, look, you would not be in just the develop module. You'll be using the effects, the local adjustments, probably some layers, layer mask. You'll be going a lot further than what I'm doing in this video today. So now we have the white balance. If you remember correctly, or from earlier, I mentioned that the white balance where it says as shot here, I don't recommend you mess around with this with a JPEG because you don't have as much latitude. You have some wiggle room, right? And the white balance is really just telling the camera what is truly white in the image. Now, if I wanted to tell the camera that, hey, this area of the dress is actually white, make everything else essentially the right color around that, then I can click this eyedropper and come over to her dress. Uh-oh, there we go. And then click. And if I zoom out, you definitely want to zoom in when you do this. You can see I'm getting a way different look than the original, which is a little bit cooler in temperature, which we'll talk about here in a second. It's a little cooler in temperature than the final image that, you know, with me selecting that as the white point, it said, hey, you know what? That's a little bit warmer than everything else. So we need to warm up the image. All right. Or that's a little bit cooler than everything else because if you look at her dress, it's a little blue. Well, ON1 said, well, we need to warm it up because it's not as cool. I'm sorry, we need to warm it up because it's too cool. So if I double click this, or if I click on as shot, you can see it just brings it back to 0. And you have the option of cooling down your image, which is just going to add blue. So if you shoot an image and it looks something like this when it comes out of the camera, then you're going to probably want to go the opposite direction because that's telling you that your white balance is off and it's a little bit warmer than you would like it to be. So let's pull that to the left and voila, this brings you to the more presentable version of an image. And then vice versa. If you get an image out of your camera and it looks like this, that means your white balance was off. So then you just need to warm it up a little bit more. And then you get to a presentable, wherever you want it to be. Again, when you are doing this, don't overthink it. Just put it however you think will be the best for your delivery, for your client, your target audience. That's my recommendation. Just do the best that you can with that. Then there's the tint slider. Now, based off of what type of camera you have, your camera may shift more towards magenta or towards green. Magenta being on the right side here. You may get a photo, and I have to put a lot into this JPEG to make it pop to show up, but you can see this is a little bit more of a magenta tint. And no matter how much I pull this left or right, you can see the skin just doesn't quite get rid of that magenta look, right? Now, obviously, you can see that I've added in a lot of it, but you can pull this slider around. And if you start getting weird colors and skin tones, then that's something that you probably want to take a look at as your tint. And then same thing with the green. I have to pull it up pretty high, but this is usually a very shuttle shift. I have not seen going past -5 or +3. So -5 meaning having to pull it into to the green to remove some magenta, or going up by 3 to remove some of the green. Now, that's just for the cameras that I've used. I haven't used every camera out there. So you may end up needing, well, there you go, reset. You may end up needing to move those a little bit further than what I just recommended, because the tint slider is going to be very subjective to your particular camera. And then the last thing in the tone and color, because we're not going to go over the purity, or I'll briefly go over the purity segment here, but the reduce vibrance on skin. So based on the skin tones, and you can play around with this, all right? My daughter's and my family's skin tones, the vibrance or reduce vibrance on skin, it works somewhat. And I'll show you what it's doing here. So I don't know how well that's coming through on the stream. So I'm just going to crank up the vibrance, so that way it really pops. You see how her skin tone is really, really orange. If I click on reduce vibrance from skin tones, it's going to make the skin look a little bit more natural. Now, in this photo, it does a pretty good job. So if I wanted to crank up the vibrance if I wanted to crank up the vibrance on the rest of the image, right? So we'll just pull this down for a second, and we'll focus on her dress. If I want to make that dress pop a little bit better, and you see how it's making her skin look really, really orange. As soon as I click this, watch what happens to her skin. It just removes it from the skin, but the dress stays nice and vibrantly pink or poppy, whatever, vibrant. This image is actually doing pretty good on this image, but I have played with this slider, or I'm sorry, with this button in the past, and it did not work as well. So test it out on your images. If it doesn't work, just turn it off. All right. And if it does, then good. Turn it on and leave it on. Now, the purity section, these are actually pretty straightforward. I hover over this and it tells you what it does. It reduces the color saturation of the highlights to remove a color cast. So if you end up with a weird color cast, which I don't have one in this image, and we'll see if I have one in any of the images that I show today. But if I started to, and we're looking at the highlights, right? If I started to see weird colors in my highlights, all I have to do to get rid of that color cast, specifically in the highlights, is just pull down on this slider. Now, this really happens when you're using jails, if you're doing that, or if you're in a place where there's a weird LED reflection light, like an arcade, and you take a photo with a flash, but the flash wasn't strong enough to overpower some of those LEDs, then yeah, you can have some highlight challenges here. And then the same thing with the shadows. If there is an issue with a color cast in the shadows and you need those to be more pure to be in a shadow, you just pull up on the shadows slider here and it'll start to make those a little bit darker. And you can see it's impacting her dress, making these areas a little bit darker. This could be a good way of including a little bit more perceived contrast in your image, but I usually leave those alone. So that is the tone and color. And that's probably where you're going to spend 90% of your time when you're editing a photo inside of the develop tab or module. All right. Now we will move on to noise and sharpening. And please drop your questions in the comment section if you got them. That's what I'm here for. Now, remember, I recommended you just bypass this altogether. And I don't want to make this a no noise AI tutorial, but I'm going to turn on no noise AI, and there's no noise in this particular image. So it's not going to work as well as it could on a image that has a lot of noise. Oh, sorry. That was very rude of me. So it's trying to figure out where all of the noise is. It does a great job. If you have this plugin, you already know. And if you don't have this plugin, I recommend you get it because this is by far one of the best plugins or the AI features inside of ON1 that I have experienced. And yeah, I can't say enough good things about this particular plugin, but there are some better ones on the market, but this one is great for coming with the software. All right. You can see it tried to remove some noise and it made this weird, really soft looking image on my daughter here. So if your images don't have noise in them, don't try to denoise them. And I guess that's up to you. If you want something that looks a little bit more, less coarse, then maybe, using a noise reducer will help out. It makes this image look a little bit softer. And it's actually not a terrible effect, right? If I were to go halfway over here and then we zoom in, you can see there's no texture in my daughter's skin on the right side where there used to be texture. And that's essentially what's going to happen when you run noise reduction. It's going to get rid of as much of the perceived noise as it possibly can, but at the same time, preserve some of the texture. And this is where you can do the enhanced details, messing around with the luminance, which is really the thing that's removing the noise, and then enhancing the detail because it's making it brighter at the same time removing the noise, and then enhancing the detail, the colors, and then of course sharpening, because this tends to make photos look a little bit more dull. It brings in a level of sharpening so you can get that definition back. I don't recommend you adding a noise reduction tool to an image that doesn't need it. So we're just going to click on classic, leave it at 0, and then I am going to close out of this double preview because we don't need it. All right. So that is noise and sharpening. Again, I'm not going crazy deep into that. Now we're at the lens correction. And I think, we'll do better. I'm just going to go ahead and hit done on this image. We're going to do better with using the lens correction on a raw file, because that's where you're really going to see it the most. JPEG images doesn't really work the best. So let me get a sip of tea while that thinks about that. And if you're finding value so far, smash that like button. Let me know in the comment section what your questions are, and I will be more than happy to answer them. So because all of these photos from Mother's Day are JPEGs, I have a few other photos that are not JPEGs, they're RAW. And I'm going to open up this one. This is from earlier this week. It is a, if you're not familiar already, there's a 52-week challenge that I'm hosting. I decided to do food photography for this particular challenge. I am no food photographer by the stretch of the imagination, but this is, one of the photos that I took, and I'm just going to show you. So this is a raw photo. You can tell right here where it says raw, and I took this with my EOS R, but any camera that allows you to take raw photos, then you'll have access to some of these things. I'm going to hit this drop down, and you can see I was using my RF 50mm f1.8 STM lens. Now this is a fairly new lens, so ON1, you can see if I come down to lens profile, it identifies that it's a Canon, but it says lens and no match. Now, if I were to hit auto, it thinks about it, and then it's like, no, I don't have a lens in my profiles for you. What is it that you want me to do? Now, if I were to turn this off, and you can see there's no edits happening. The reason for that is I haven't made any adjustments because ON1 doesn't know what to adjust. Again, this is more of an advanced thing. If you do not need to correct for your lens, then just bypass this portion. You don't need to do this. I don't want you to feel like because it's in the develop module, you have to use it. You don't. You absolutely do not. But if I click this drop down, I get a long list of lens available to me. The drop down that I clicked is over here on lens. If I click this, I can go and find a similar lens, which in this case would probably be the Canon EF 50mm 1.8. And there's a Canon EF, let me scroll up a little bit. Now I scrolled too far. There's a lot of lens from the Canon manufacturer, but this is worthwhile, right? So Canon EF 50mm f1.8, and then there's the Canon 50mm EF f1.8 STM. So since I have the STM, I'm just going to click that and see what happens. Now, when I click it, you can see it starts to stretch the image a little bit, and this helps with distortion in the image. So turning it off and on, that's essentially what I get there. Now, I could have selected any one of these lenses because that's the beauty of having the flexibility to edit your photos. But if I wanted to go with the Canon EF 50mm f1.8 without the STM, then it doesn't do as dramatic of a correction. Again, you don't have to do this if it's not something that is making your photo look weird. I think sometimes when I got into, or earlier on when I got into photo editing, I used to think like, oh, I have to correct my lens. You only have to correct it if you feel like something is just out of proportion. But to most viewers, they're not going to know that you did not correct for your lens, and it's okay. Then, if yours looks like this and that's where you want to stop, then so be it. Stop right there. Don't worry about continuing on. However, if you want to get a little bit more technical with it, I will go over these very briefly. So you have a distortion option. This is going to help correct for any distortion in your image. Now, this could be a creative effect, depending on how you want to work with your image. But notice that it's like a zoom. Like this looks a little odd, right? The plate looks longer and elongated here than it does down here. So, you can go a little too far. And then if you look like this, then you really warp the image. And if you go all the way to the right, you like really zoomed in and puckered in on the image. So that type of distortion, you can get away with some. Like if I wanted to go like that, just to make these look a little bit larger on the plate, then sure, like that's not going to jump off at someone and be like, whoa, look at you edited the photo in this surreal way. Like there's no way that it would have looked that way, right? But if you seen something like this, you'd be like, whoa, that guy must have taken an image with a fisheye lens. And really, it doesn't become evident until you see the original, and then you see this one as like so. Like this is, you can tell that it's like rounding. And yeah, so we'll double click that to reset. And I think a little bit of distortion, add in a little bit of distortion, and that's fine. Now we get to color fringing. If you are photographing backlit photos, which means the light is coming from behind or somewhere behind the subject, doesn't have to be directly behind, but there tends to be on the contrasted areas, give me 1 second, on the edges of the subject where the sun, if this were the backlit area, this edge would have a color tint to it. If you're seeing that on your images, then you definitely want to get rid of this. It's called color fringing. This happens with lenses that don't have a specific type of coating. Some lenses do better with color fringing than others. Again, more technical than we need to discuss. All you have to do is look at the color of it. If it's purple, then you just pull this bad boy up until that goes away. And if it's green, you pull this up until it goes away or it reduces it to a tolerable or palatable level. All right. That's all that the color fringing is. And again, every lens is going to perform differently. So my recommendation is try this out with your lens, see what happens. And if it works, it works. And if it doesn't, then hey, it just doesn't work. And you just move on, right? And then there's the fall off. So the amount of the fall off is really talking about like vignetting. I'm trying to cause some here. I don't know how well that's coming through on the stream. Let me see. It's kind of coming through. So if I were to pull this all the way down, this is getting darker around the edges of the image. Now, the midpoint is going to allow me to move where that's actually starting the fall off at, or where that vignette starts. But you'll know if your lens is vignetting, and if it is, you'll mess around with the fall off, where if it's vignetting, then you can just pull up on this a little bit and open up those corners, so that way it adds in a little bit more light to those areas. But this lens does not vignette. And when I say vignette, if you're not familiar with that, that means the corners of your image are dark. And if you bear with me, I'll show you what a vignette would look like on your image. This is not part of the lesson today, but I just want to make sure, because I don't have any examples of vignetting since all of my lens do pretty well. And then we'll just pull these out to the sides like so. And then I'll make this really obvious. Hopefully your lens does not look this crazy of a vignette. As you can see, let me go like this. So as you can see, these corners, I over exaggerated just so it'll come through pretty decent on the stream. But the corners are just super, super dark. Really, really dark, right? This is where you would come into that fall off and you would start to boost this up, and you could see that it's reducing some of that exposure burn that I put on there. But when your lens vignettes, it will not be as harsh as you see right here. Okay, it's not going to be nearly as harsh. It should be much less. And then the midpoint just adjusts where that fall off starts to begin. And if you are good with all of the settings that you make here, you can hit this drop down where it says default, and you can hit save new style. And I'm actually going to save this for my RF 50 millimeter lens. And I'll just type in Canon. Right now, they're the only ones producing RF glass, well, mostly. But in the future, if I ever use this lens again and I want to correct for the lens, I can click on my drop downs and then I can select Canon RF 50 millimeter lens, right? So now I have the ability to make my distortion in my images not look so crazy. Now let me get rid of this adjustment. We'll come back to develop and we'll close the lens correction. So hopefully that made sense. If it did, drop a comment down below. Now the last segment is transform. Transform is a very unique segment of the editing or the develop module. Like I had mentioned earlier, you have these three features up here: keystone, level, and move. Now, keystone works better with buildings. You can warp the edges of the building to make them look more straight and upright. You see, when I click on it, I get this box. Now, I don't have a building, but I'm just going to mess around with this because I don't do too much architectural photography. I don't do any. So I'll have to go and get some of those to make a better display of this. But as you can see, the perspective, it looks different, right? So when I click on apply, you see how it changes this this plate. It makes you look at it from a different angle. Now, this could be desirable, right? Maybe that'll work. And if it does, then great. It makes this fork look a lot longer in the frame. It makes the pancakes look more prominent than they were. It could work. You could do some creative things. Don't know if it works the greatest, but it's just changing the perspective of this image, which now forces me to crop this a little bit. I'm going to reset that. And then we'll hit level. So level gives you a little ruler. When you click it, it doesn't look like it did anything, but if I needed to make something straight, right? Oh, there we go. It went away for a second. I can click on one edge and then go to the end of that other edge where I would make it straight. Click there, and now it has made my plate horizontally straight. Now, this does not look good, so I'm going to reset that. But if I wanted to make this fork more straight in the image, I can go from here, click once, hold on the click, and then drag all the way down to about there. And now the fork is straight up and down in the image. All right. So that actually comes in handy. But the problem with this, all right, because some of you, if you've used ON1 in the past, you're going to say, Chris, what's the difference between the level tool inside of transform and the level tool inside of the crop? So let's go to crop. And grab the level tool. And I'm just going to click and drag, do the same thing. Notice this is leveling by the crop, right? So if I were to apply this, I don't have that weird white space that I did in the previous image. This is not a bad image, and you know, you can absolutely work with this. Let's go back to crop and reset. If I were to use the level tool inside of the transform module, and I do this, watch what happens to the edges of my image. You see how I get this white border? Well, now I have to come in and actually do the crop, like so. And you can do it with the aspect ratio. So if I want to go 2:3, which is the ratio of my sensor size, I can bring it in and I can hit apply like that. And now I no longer have those white borders. There's a little bit at the corner there, but I can fix that later. And I get to the same end result. All right. Why would you want to use this one over the crop tool version? 9 times out of 10, you're going to want to use the one inside of the crop tool. But if you are working on a composite image and you don't want to change the canvas size, then you have to transform the image independent from the canvas, which is what transform does. You are transforming the pixels separate from the canvas. When you go into the crop tool, you are adjusting the canvas. So if I were to start pulling in on here, you see I'm getting rid of canvas space. And now, whenever I make an adjustment, if I go, what just happened? When I go horizontal, and I guess that doesn't really help. Let's go shift. So if I shift this, I am moving the entire canvas and all I want to do is, you usually won't have to come down into this area. This area gets really, really confusing with the way that it actually works. But we'll reset that. And then you have the move tool. Now the move tool does exactly what you would think it does, except for it moves the entire canvas, all right? Or the entire image, not the canvas. Because if I were to go like this, and we'll put a red backdrop. And just bear with me for a second. Back over here. Guess that's not working that way. Let me check something. There it is. I don't know why it wasn't showing up. Come on, reset. There we go. All right. So now we'll actually go like this. All right. So now if I hit the move tool and I click and drag, you can see I'm moving the image around on the canvas. All right. So this is where, you want to be careful because you can really make your image look odd overall because you move too much around on the canvas. But what you can also do is some creative stuff where you grab the move tool and you click and drag just a little bit and then maybe over like so. And, that can be a interesting way of adding a border to your image. I have a video on adding borders using the border filter, but if you're like, you know what, I don't want to use border filters or anything crazy like that, you can just do it this way. Don't recommend it this way. You don't have as much control, but it's still an option. All right. So let's go ahead and reset that, and we'll go down through these controls really quickly. So vertical is exactly that. It's going to rotate your image vertically up and down. And then horizontal is going to rotate from the center horizontally left and right. And then you have rotation, which is just going to rotate your image. So this could be good, bad, indifferent. Then you have scale. Now, scale is something that you may want to use on the transform tool. And this is where you can use scale, and then you can also use the shift items to move your image around inside of the frame. So kind of like the crop tool, but maybe you're like, you know what? I don't think I need to crop to a certain aspect ratio. What I want to do is keep everything the same in my overall canvas, but I want to just zoom in a little bit. And, again, this comes in more with compositing. So if you're not familiar with compositing, then don't worry about it. But moral of the story, you may want to zoom in just a little bit and then shift a thing around, right, inside of the frame. So if I just wanted to cut off that fork a little bit and have the pancakes be a little bit more of the show, right, I can just zoom in, and now the pancakes fill up a good portion of the frame. And of course, you can also use the rise, which brings your photo up and down. So if I wanted to bring those pancakes more to the top third of the image, I could do it like so. And this, it's the exact same image. If I were to turn this off, I just zoomed in on it a little bit more and repositioned it. So that's all that is. And then you also have a grid where you can go 10%, 5%, and 1%. And this just shows you an overlay. At 1%, it's like, okay, how much you are moving your image off of the normal or the original perspective. That's all it is. All right. So I'm not going to go too much deeper into that. Now I'm going to turn off transform because, again, you're not going to use that. We're going to go back to tone and color. Now, I am on a raw image, so there are two things that I now have that I didn't have during the JPEG. On camera profile, I get to change my color space. Now, I specifically use my Canon EOS R because the color space, or the color profile, I should say, camera profile. There we go. The camera profile that I'm using you can use ON1. Everyone who has ON1, you're going to get these 5 camera raw or camera profiles available to you. However, based off of the manufacturer of your camera, there's going to be camera profiles for that manufacturer, but ON1 has to actually go and pull those. ON1 has not pulled the profiles for the R6 yet. So, but for the EOS R, there are profiles. And these are those profiles right here that Camera Raw can read. There is a way to import profiles, and I am going to do a complete video on that. So stay tuned. I'm waiting for the resources that I need in order to do it, which is a color checker, and it is not here. So I can't show you how to build the ICC profiles without having a color checker, because that's what you need to do it. But for those of you who are just starting out, don't worry about importing, and really don't worry about anything below or outside of the ON1 preset camera profiles. And then you can even use your manufacturers if they're available, but all you have to do is hover over them to see what they're doing to the image. Choose something that's desirable to you, and I recommend doing this before you do any edit. Now, you can hit AI Auto if you're like, all right, I don't know what to do. Hit AI Auto, leave it on ON1 Standard, hit AI Auto, and then start cycling through the camera profiles. And, you know, like this is a good editorial photo, in my opinion, for food. So I can hit AI Auto, hit ON1 Portrait, and now I get a really nice blend of what I want. So, you know, take my recommendation however you want and run with it, because I don't always take my recommendation of editing the camera profile without seeing what is potential with the image. All right. Now, AI match is that second thing that I was telling you you have access to outside of the camera profiles whenever you edit a raw image. Let me get a sip of tea. Now, okay, we'll just keep rolling. All right, so outside of the raw profile, or I'm sorry, the camera profiles, you get access to AI match. AI match is going to get as close as it can to what you've seen on the back of your camera. Whenever you look at the back of your camera, right? When you look at the back of your camera, you will see that there's going to be a JPEG whenever you take the image, right? Or I'm sorry, you're going to see an image on the back of your camera. That is the JPEG representation that's coming through on your camera. Now, that gets baked into your raw file because that's your preview. And it is a very, very small JPEG. But what AI Match is trying to do is take the information that your camera made as for that JPEG and make it make sense inside of ON1. Every raw processor reads raw images differently. So you got to be careful or cognizant of that. Not careful. It doesn't really make that much of a difference. Just know how your processor works. And I recommend you edit inside of a processor such as ON1 as much as you can, so you get used to the way that it converts raw images. And then you know when you're taking a photo, what's going to happen when you get back into the editing space. All right. But AI Match, again, you get access to this auto feature. And if I pull this down to the left, you will see that I have the ability to do, some pretty cool stuff here. Or I'm sorry, not pretty cool stuff. It's moving the stuff algorithmically and in perspective to the ratio. It's moving everything proportionately. So if I want to pull this down, then, I get the pancakes looking one way. And if I pull this up, they're looking a different way, right? It's all the adjustments that are happening here. And even in the saturation, I'm getting some movement down there, all the way to the point of going back to 0. And then, of course, if I were, and I think it's even moving the white balance. I think I've seen the white balance jump. I guess not. Thought it was, but it didn't. So, I can pull the whites. Let's say I want to, honestly, I would leave this image as is, maybe adjust the highlights a little bit. So I'll pull the highlights down, right? And that may be where I want the image to go. Now I lose access to that auto slider. So there you go. You have that difference that came about in ON1 Photo Raw using all of this. So, in a nutshell, that is every single thing that you really need to know about ON1 Photo Raw Develop module. Now, there are some things that you should probably be aware of beyond this. And if I were to hit this preset icon, I get my preset window. Now, we've only been working in the develop module. Let's see if I can make this a little bit larger. We'll hit the drop down, and you have your 4 modules as we've already discussed, right? You got your color and tone, your noise and sharpening, lens correction, and transform. Now, if there's a blue dot, then that means it's going to turn it on in the preset. If there is not a blue dot, or I'm sorry, if the blue dot is checked off, then that means it's not going to turn on. Now, my personal preference to you, or recommendation, is don't turn on lens correction, or I'm sorry, you can leave lens correction on, assuming that you did not change a profile like I did. If you did, then leave it off. ON1, when it opens, it will open up the lens correction. All right. Or just leave it off. It doesn't matter. I think I'm confusing myself with that. Then you can turn off transform. I don't think you ever need transform turned on for a preset, period. Now, where it gets a little tricky is inside of the color and tone. And then, of course, noise and sharpening, you could turn that off as well. Or you can leave it on. It just depends on you, but I would turn it off, all right? So really, I'm just going to turn off all 3 of those things because we don't need them. Now, where you want to be selective with what you choose is inside of your, maybe you want a camera profile. My recommendation is if you only want to add a particular camera profile every time, you add the camera profile. So let's say we chose camera raw portrait, and I only want to add camera raw portrait to all of my images whenever I add this preset. Well, all I have to do is click camera profile, make sure that that bubble is checked, and you can see this is a half bubble. That's telling you that there's some things that are turned off inside of the tone and color module, but something is also turned on. So if I turn on another one, it stays. If I turn on this one, it stays. And if I turn on this one, then it goes back to a full circle. All right. That's something to be aware of when you're making your presets, because you may make a preset and then you click on it and it does something weird and you're like, oh man, my preset didn't work. Well, it actually did work. It just worked the way that you allowed it to work. all right, or that you enable it to work. And if you hit these drop downs, you see you have access to all of these options. Now, one of the things that I recommend that you can turn on if you just want to edit your images easily, you can turn on auto tone and you can leave camera profile. And those are the only two things that you need turned on. And you will be good to go from there. All right. That's all you need. Camera profile and auto tone. And then you can save this, and every time that you click on it, and I'll just do that real quick. Cam and tone is what I'll call it. And I don't need anything else because I don't need the white balance. You could even put it on auto color if you wanted to, but I don't think you do need that. And then purity, you don't need anything there, right? So this is saved in my testing ground presets, cam and tone. And that's just short for camera profile and tone. So now I am going to hit done on this image, and we're going to go to another image, and I'm just going to use that preset, and you'll see how fast you can edit photos, especially if you are brand new to editing and you're like, I just want to get my photos edited. And truthfully, you can, and I'm also going to show you a little bit of an advanced trick. So when you are importing your images, you'll be able to do this, because I think that there's some value in just auto applying something like this, especially if you know that you're only going to be using camera profile or auto tone and a particular camera profile. Okay. You know what? It's because I saved that color background. It turned the image into an on photo. That's why it was taking so long to save. Be cognizant of that. So we're going to open up, we'll open up this image here. And there's actually two ways that you can apply a preset. You can open the image and apply the preset, or you can come to the preset tab over here, and I am going to navigate to where I saved my preset. Wherever your presets are, that's where you'll have to go. Should be somewhere in here. Should have been in here. Oh, there it is. All right, cam and tone. Boom. Click. Watch what happens to this image. I guess that was it. Now, you should get an icon that looks like this little plus minus. Okay, there we go. So now I have the cam and tone preset applied to this image. If I hit edit, you will see when I hit this drop down, well, that's odd. It was supposed to change to AI Auto. Let's find out what happened here. Cam and tone. AI Auto. Maybe I didn't have it selected. I think that's what happened. Okay. So whenever you run into this issue, I'm glad this happened. Whenever you run into this issue, what you're going to do is select AI Auto, or make the adjustment that you want it to have happen, and then right click on the preset and click update preset with current settings. All right. And then hit the drop down. Like, I don't want everything in develop, right? What I want, and I don't need any of that. I want the same stuff that I had before. And then I'll turn that off and then hit auto tone and hit update. All right. So now AI Auto is selected, so it's going to actually apply it. So if I hit done, and then I'm just going to go to a different image and add the preset like I showed you. But this time I'm just going to open the image and add it. As soon as it gets done saving. Okay. So now I can click on this one and I will go to my testing ground, click cam and tone. It's going to add that particular preset to the image. Eventually. Yeah. Hopefully your computer doesn't take as long as mine just did. And now when I hit edit, this image should have the auto tone selected for the photo here. Yes, see, AI auto is now selected, and this is a raw image, so this is going to highlight as soon as the upload, or the render is unpacked. So now I'm starting off with the camera profile and AI auto on my image, so I can just go and start making my edits. And this is a good place to start. So that's something you can build for yourself, have it available, and start working on your images pretty much instantly. But I did promise you I was going to show you something. So we'll hit cancel on this one. Yeah, I'm okay with canceling that. And what we are going to do is come up to File and Import from Device. Now, I have some images on an SD card here, and I'm not going to actually import these because they should probably all be imported. Okay. I thought I have an SD card connected. Okay. So, give me a second. Let me just plug that back in. And let's see what happens. Let me close that out, and then we'll hit File, Import from Device. Huh. I need to go. Sorry. Got to jump between a few windows here. There's my desktop. Oh, it didn't mount my SD card for some reason. Just bear with me, guys. Bear with me. Because I think it'll be value added for you to see this if it will read my SD card. And if not, then I guess it'll be fine. We might be able to get by without it. So let's just go back. File and import device. So during the import, you have photo settings, and you can click on add preset. Right now I have it set to none. Really, I just have it turned off. But because you may want to start editing those images, and this is really, really good if you have a bunch of JPEGs and you're like, you know what, I just need to edit these things on the fly instantly. All right. What you can do is come into this preset one, scroll down until you find the testing ground, and then you can select cam and tone. So as these images are imported into ON1 Photo Raw, then the preset cam and tone will be applied to them. So I'm instantly starting off with a really, really good starting point And I may not even need to edit the image. I may be able to look at it and say, nope, that image is ready to go and I like it. And what you can even do is add a black and white filter, and you can have a black and white edit if you know that you want to deliver all your photos in black and white, and you want to start with a pre-toned image, then you're good to go, right? And that may be all you need to do to your images. One of the other things, and we'll take a look here. We'll go to our preferences. I made a virtual copy, or a version. So underneath the files section, and again, this is a little bit more advanced, but I think some of you may find value in this. Underneath the file section, if the thing applies where you want to add a particular preset to every single JPEG image that your camera produces, what you can do is find your camera. You can find it by serial number, or you can just find it by the nomenclature or the name, the camera name. But if you have multiple cameras, this really helps if you have like two EOS R6s, or I guess that's right here. I only have one. This is the EOS R6 where it's no serial number, or it's the EOS R6 and it's going to look for this specific serial number. All right. If that's the case, where you're looking for a specific serial number or whatever, nonetheless, you get the camera, and you can click on the preset section, right? So if I want all of my EOS R6 to have that cam and tone preset, I can go over here, find it, and go cam and tone, boom. And then I can even change if I want it to be on a raw image only, or if I want it to be on JPEGs only. So I can click there. I only want you to upload that to a JPEG image. There we go. Just click off of that. So now I'm telling ON1, whenever I upload a JPEG from my Canon EOS R6, add cam and tone to that image. But not only that, this is going to look through my entire library and find all of those JPEGs that don't have the cam and tone preset applied to it, and it's going to apply it to it. So be very, very careful. Now, the other option that you see I have checked here, and this is why I was saying the lens correction, you can have that on or off in your preset, is I have apply lens corrections automatically to raw photos. Whenever I import a raw photo, it's going to automatically apply lens correction. All right. That's a check block inside of the files underneath your preferences. You can do that as well. And then disable base corrections on raw photos. I have that turned off because I usually like to edit my own images. So those are two really cool ways. And in order to reset this, you can go default and then just reset that back to raw, make everything what it is, hit cancel. It's not going to save because I don't want to do that. So there it is. You guys have witnessed, and my camera may or may not be working right now. So I apologize if it isn't, but if it is, and you're not looking at a frozen thing, then thank you for hanging out with me today and, learning a little bit about ON1 Photo Raw. What we are going to do now is I'll take a few questions if there are any. And Tony says, thank you. I appreciate it. That's what I'm here for. I want to help teach as much as I can about ON1 Photo Raw. So thank you guys for hanging out. Now, if you have not picked up a copy of ON1, check the description box. There should be a link to it's an affiliate link. If you purchase through that link, it helps the channel grow, and I greatly appreciate it. But this is definitely a program that I use each and every time that I'm editing a photo. So much so that I have neglected my Luminar AI, and I just purchased Luminar Neo, or not just, but I purchased it back in November, whenever they did the pre-sale. And I'm waiting for the final version, which I'd like to make note that if you already purchased Luminar Neo, you get access right now to a early version of Luminar. It is not the full version of Luminar, but it gives you an opportunity to play around with I think there's 3 new features like Relight AI, power line removal, and something else, dust spot removal or something. That's something that you can go take a look at right now inside of your Luminar account. I'm not sponsored, or I guess I am an affiliate for them, but I just want to make sure that you know that if you purchased it, you have access to go and download it and install it and start playing around with it. Again, it's not the full version, so I recommend you read the little article that they have about it. But it's worthwhile just to have on your computer. I've been messing around with it, debating on putting some videos out. I know Anthony Morgani has put out some videos on Luminar Neo, as well as a few other people. I think Jim Nix and Scott Davenport have some videos out as well. So, I'm debating on if I should even add my 2 cents or not when it comes to that. I think I want to wait until the full version comes out, but we'll see. Because there's nothing that is so groundbreaking that I need to beat the drum along with those guys who do a phenomenal job at explaining a lot of these things. So hopefully, that's value added to those of you who have purchased Luminar Neo. And if you haven't, and you want to pick up Luminar Neo, in the description box below, there should also be a referral link. Again, that is an affiliate link. It helps this channel grow, and I would greatly appreciate it. So, with that said, there is not much else for me to share with you today, pending any questions or comments that you want me to address. If you want me to show you how to do anything. If you're watching this on the restream, then, thank you. I know this was a long one, but go down to the comment section and let me know if you have any questions. So I will leave it there, and I will see you guys next weekend, which is the day before my birthday. That's actually kind of exciting. So we'll see what we have to do. If you haven't already, check out the 52-week challenge over at freewillphotos.com. It is completely free. Post your photos to Instagram. Tag me on the images so that way I can, do the double heart thingy and, show your photos some love. And then I just want to see what you guys come up with. And every week I'm going to be posting there. I'm not going to saturate the channel with that information. It'll probably be photo edits of those images, so that way it's pertinent to the audience that has hit that subscribe button, because I never want to be disrespectful or inconsiderate to the reason you hit subscribe, which is so you can get photo editing content. And then while I'm photo editing, maybe I'll share some insight. So it'll be rebranded content essentially. Yeah, I think that's everything. So until next time, I want you guys to stay inspired and keep creating. Peace.